Yo, what is going on, Comfy Gang? It's your boy Comfy Neat here. First of all, yeah, long time no see. Sorry again for not uploading in a while. So for today's video, I'm basically going to be talking about or theorizing about the many stages of NEETdom. And, take what I say with a grain of salt in this video because, well, I'm basically talking out of my ass at this point, and there might not be any sort of like set order, or path to being a NEET, I guess. But at the same time, I've been kind of doing some thinking about this, and because I've been wanting to make this, a video topic for a while now, but have been kind of like struggling how to like put it into words and stuff. But basically, I've been thinking about it, and yeah, I thought that perhaps there's a certain sort of like common behaviors among NEETs that, and especially in terms of how their behaviors, their habits change over time, as well as their experiences, their subjective feelings and emotions and stuff and behaviors. So anyways, yeah, I thought I would try and like categorize that into different stages, and this is probably mostly going to be based off of me. So yeah, it might not apply to you exactly, but I hope you guys find this video interesting. And some key points before I start the video is that these stages are going to be in order of I guess, I don't know if severity is the right term, but like basically the longer a person stays in NEET, the more their behaviors will progress according to these different stages. And yeah, so I guess the big factor would be length of time spent as a NEET, as well as individual differences, for example, like personality traits, predispositions to certain things, behaviors, and how fast their brain adapts to certain things like pleasure and stuff. And the next thing is that these stages aren't irreversible, and they're not like set in stone. So for example, one individual might skip a stage entirely depending on their individual circumstances, and or another case would be that they might go back and forth between stages because obviously one stage might be better than the other, and that individual might be constantly seeking and finding ways to jump between stages, or revert back to a previous stage. So yeah, anyways, that's all I wanted to say in this intro, and now I'm going to start the video. So yeah. All right, so the first stage of NEETdom would be what I refer to as the honeymoon period or honeymoon stage. And as the name suggests, it takes place directly after a person becomes a NEET, usually after they've worked some sort of job or been at school, and they basically decided enough is enough and decided to essentially check out of society. And typically the stage lasts anywhere from 1 to 2 months, at least for me, because I've been NEET twice, and that's, I guess, roughly how long it lasts for me. And usually it's characterized by two major feelings or emotions. The first being this huge sense of relief, because typically before this time, the individual probably was accumulating a lot of stress, pent-up frustration, all sorts of negative emotions, maybe perhaps from feeling underappreciated at their work, or overwhelmed with their workload at school or at their job. And as a result of this is what essentially pushed them towards becoming a NEET. So when they finally take the plunge and become a NEET, immediately they're met with this huge sort of like wave of relief washing over them, because all of a sudden now they have all their time. They experience this sort of like sense of freedom that they sort of regained after having lost it at their job or school. And yeah, and so that's probably the first thing the individual feels. And if they can feel this simultaneously with, or perhaps they might not feel this at all, because the second emotion that they might experience is probably some sort of guilt, because depending on the circumstances, perhaps they're if they're at school, then it's pretty common. But even if they're at like a job where they're highly respected, where people are constantly like pressuring them to stay at that job because of the money involved or the status involved, and they decide to quit because they feel that it's not worth the struggle, it's not worth the I guess the hustle, then they might also feel a huge wave of guilt, and this might, cut into the feeling of relief. It might completely overwhelm it. In fact, all they might feel is guilt. So it really depends on the person, and they might feel so much guilt that they might even skip this stage altogether. So it really depends on the person. But let's say they don't feel any guilt, or they only feel a small amount of guilt, then they're probably most likely going to well, either way, they're probably going to engage in some sort of activity, some sort of cope that they've been wanting to do for a long time, but haven't had the chance to do so, mostly because of the responsibilities associated with whatever, job or, schooling they were previously at. And typically this will be something, consumer related, consuming some sort of like thing like anime, video games, TV, documentaries, reading books, eating snacks at all, sorts of hours, and, any combination of these things. It might be even hobbies, but rarely so, I think. I've honestly have no idea, but it depends on the person. But anyways, yeah, they'll typically engage in a set of activities that they've been wanting to do for a long time, and they will really, really enjoy it, because usually, for the most part, people will still, will most likely be feeling the sense of freedom and this feeling of relief from having this sort of burden lifted off of their shoulders. And when this is coupled with the fact that their dopaminergic systems haven't yet adapted to this activity that they've been wanting to do for a long, long time, they will probably extract maximum pleasure from this activity, and they will most likely engage in this activity for very, very long periods of time, probably maybe at the very least 5 to 6 hours a day, if not longer. Obviously broken up with mealtime and stuff, and sleep, and I guess bathing if this person hasn't decided to go full degen yet. And yeah, so they will probably enjoy this activity a lot. And yeah, typically this period of NEETdom is usually the most enjoyable stage out of all the stages, because everything is still brand new, and for the most part, assuming they're not experiencing any guilt, then they most likely enjoying everything to the maximum. The one caveat being that, let's say that the activity that they're currently doing in this stage is something that they've been doing like prior to becoming a NEET. Like, for example, if they're in school and they're binge watching TV series, and they decide to binge watch TV series once they become a NEET, then it's obviously going to be less enjoyable, and might even accelerate the rate at which they reach the next stage, which I'm going to be talking about. But anyways, yeah, this is probably the most subjectively enjoyable stage of being a NEET, and it's probably what a lot of ex-NEETs will reminisce or recall NEETdom being like, because, or associate the emotions experienced during the stage is what a lot of ex-NEETs will fondly associate NEETdom with. And it's probably what a lot of aspiring NEETs will fantasize NEETdom is like 24/7. So yeah, anyways, on to I'll be talking about the next stage now. So the second stage of NEETdom is what I refer to as the hedonic stage, or an alternative name would be the binging stage. And in terms of outward behaviors, this stage is essentially the same as the first stage in terms of outward appearances, because basically it still involves the NEET engaging in activities which they find pleasurable as much as they can throughout the day, and alternating between one or two activities. But the key difference between this stage and the first stage is that, whereas in the first stage the NEET involved was probably swept up in that sense of freedom and the newness of everything, where they probably extracted maximum pleasure from everything and probably could find nothing at all boring in what they're doing, and it probably felt almost as if they were in heaven at the time. In this stage, the NEET involved probably is starting to, their brain is essentially starting to develop some sort of hedonic adaptation to whatever they're doing. So as a result of that, they will slowly and progressively start to feel bored with whatever activity they're doing. Let's say if they're playing a video game, they're playing, let's say, JRPGs, for example, and that's what they love doing. Eventually, they'll start to, get this inkling that something is not right, something is, a little bit off. That's not to say that they won't be enjoying what they're doing, but, progressively over time, they will start to feel more and more dissatisfied, and this will cause them to do things like, quit in the middle of a game in order to play a new game because, let's say, they found, the game that they're playing boring. However, if it had been in the beginning, in the first stage, the honeymoon period, they most likely would have played that game all the way through. But because they're in this second stage where they're starting to adapt to their pleasure centers are starting to adapt to whatever activity they're doing, they will immediately, quit and, pursue something else in order to chase that pleasure. And essentially, what this stage is characterized by is, firstly, chasing the highs that are experienced in stage one, the honeymoon stage, and secondly, it's basically this adopting of various strategies in order to maximize pleasure. So, for example, the most common strategy would be, abandoning whatever they're doing, constantly switching between different, activities or games or whatever, different pieces of art media. And initially it'll firstly start in between within the whatever sort of activity that they're doing initially. So for example, it'll be switching games, but eventually it'll get to the point where it's switching across broader and broader categories. Let's say, for example, whereas they might first play different JRPGs in order to feel pleasure, eventually get to the point where they'll have to switch between genres. So they'll start to play more Western RPGs, they might start to play more first-person shooters, other genres of games, if they're able to find any sort of pleasure in that, because at this point they're probably most likely starting to get very bored of whatever they're doing. They're starting to see all the underlying patterns, common tropes, in whatever TV show they're watching, whatever anime genre of anime they're watching. So they'll start to switch between genres within an activity, and eventually it'll get to the point where they start to see the commonalities between different genres, or they'll get used to every single genre that they're inclined to enjoy. So that'll cause them to eventually start to switch between different activities. And they might switch to one activity. Let's say they'll switch from anime to video games, and then from video games to watching TV shows, and then from watching TV shows back to anime, or to playing online MMORPGs, card games, whatever. You sort of get my point. And yeah, and they'll essentially be switching between various activities, and they might do other things like maybe smoke weed if they're into drugs to maximize pleasure. They might basically try and figure out ways in order to essentially restore and regain the initial highs of the first phase. And yes, typically this stage will probably last maybe anywhere from maybe 6 months to 2 years, unless the person is prone to things like hedonic adaptation or depression. Then it might last a lot shorter. Or if they're dopamine adult consumers like I am, for example, then it might last a little bit longer. Like in some sense, I feel I still am in this stage, or I enter and exit it. And and the unfortunate thing is with the stage is that as much as a NEET might try, they'll probably never get to the same highs that they experienced in the first stage. but they will try nonetheless, and they will still enjoy relatively, decently what they're doing at the time or the activities that they're doing. But yes, over time, this enjoyment will start to diminish gradually, and they'll experience less and less joy, less and less pleasure, less and less of that sort of like classic dopamine high feeling that you get from just binging a video game. That's sort of like that buzz, that sort of like brain fog, that sort of like addictive, sort of like comfy feeling that you get from binging something and basically exploiting it to its utmost extent just to extract dopamine. Eventually you experience that less and less, which will eventually lead to the next stage that I'm going to talk about. So the third stage is what I refer to as the anhedonic stage. And this stage is a consequence of the second stage, where the individual involved was essentially constantly trying to switch between hobbies and activities and different pieces of art and media and literature and games in order to essentially extract pleasure. And when this is done enough, essentially the person involved will probably get used to every single medium out there that they're predisposed to enjoying. And this is especially given that a lot of NEETs basically have all the time in the world to pursue whatever hobbies and activities that they want. And because of that, they are more likely than not, or at a faster rate than people who have normal, I guess, work responsibilities to essentially reach this sort of stage, which is why you see a lot of normies are able to consume Marvel movies and stuff of that nature, because their consumer nature is partly stems from the fact that they don't have a chance to reach this sort of phase of basically absolute hedonic adaptation. I'm just coming up with cringe terms to describe what I'm talking about, so I apologize for that. But yeah, at this point, I said fucking absolute. Sounds retarded, but anyways, this stage is, as the name suggests, when the NEET begins to experience anhedonia, where they essentially feel almost little to no pleasure with whatever activities they're doing. And they might feel brief glimpses of pleasure. They might get brief glimpses of I guess the feeling of pleasure when they switch from activity to activity, but it's very, very short-lived. Probably lasts anywhere from an hour to maybe even 10 minutes to maybe even just 5 minutes before they all of a sudden feel bored. But at the same time, they will feel compelled to continue to do these hobbies, because how when you get addicted to a certain thing, and you're doing it anyway, like let's say for example watching YouTube, you find yourself watching YouTube, but you don't know why you're doing it, because you obviously don't find it enjoyable anymore, and yet you still continue to do it. Well, I think the same sort of feeling or whatever phenomena applies to this stage, where instead of just one activity, it's pleasurable activities that this individual finds pleasurable. It's all those activities. So this person will be trying to jump from activity to activity, but they won't find any pleasure in it, but they will continue to try and seek out the pleasure that stemmed from the first and second phases, but this time to little to no avail, because their brains have adapted to pretty much everything. But they will continue to try and do this anyway. And I guess for most NEETs, this will probably be the extent of their NEETdom, the extent of the progression of their NEETdom, and they will probably oscillate between this stage, the third stage, and the second stage, because I feel like after prolonged periods of anhedonia, eventually, at least for me, the brain will tend to reset itself, and eventually they will start to experience pleasure again. Perhaps they might try a brand new activity and manage to jump back to the second stage, or maybe even the first stage, depending on how much pleasure they can extract from this brand new activity, or it could be just that, the brain eventually sort of resets itself. Maybe the person, sits down and just stares at a wall for a while, and over time, they start to get old cravings again, and as a consequence are able to at least extract some pleasure, which will push them back into the territory of the second stage. This stage, I guess, could be a pseudo terminal stage of NEETM. So in terms of length, it might last forever, but if it progresses to further stages, then at least for this stage, it will last anywhere from maybe 2 years to maybe even 5 years. Could be shorter depending on the person, but yeah. And obviously, yeah, this is in combination with the second stage. So I guess in this stage, it would be where they are oscillating between feeling pleasure and feeling not feeling any pleasure from any activities, but at the same time, their thoughts are still, relatively the same. Perhaps at this point, their social skills have started to deteriorate, but it's not at the point where they couldn't reintegrate back into society yet. Obviously, if they are, autistic or have massive social deficits, then, it wouldn't really matter. But if there's a relatively normal or capable of, blending into society type of person, then, their social skills at this point are probably starting to be impacted, but, still haven't been impacted to the point yet where they aren't able to, do things like force themselves to interact with people if they have to, let's say, work to survive. But anyways, yeah, this pretty much sums up the third stage. So the fourth stage of NEETM is what I would refer to as the depressive stage. And, this stage, I guess in terms of length, will last as long as the depressive episodes last, but I'll get to that in a bit. But anyways, yeah, this stage also, in my opinion, tends to be like a more optional stage, because I feel like there's no guarantee that every NEET will experience this, because not all NEETs are prone to depression or predisposed to it. But at the same time, I feel like most NEETs, or a lot of NEETs, will, simply because purely from a genetic standpoint, I feel like a lot of the same genetic precursors or environmental causes that lead to NEETM also predispose one to experiencing depression and other forms of mental illness in the first place. So that's, I guess, in my opinion, why a lot of NEETs will experience this stage of NEETM. But anyways, yeah, as far as what characterizes this stage, well, it's simply depression. And this stage is basically a consequence of the anhedonic stage, where because the longer and longer a NEET spends in the anhedonic stage, where they're not able to derive any sort of pleasure in any activities they pursue, the more they are left to confront their own demons, their own negative emotions such as sadness, loneliness, feelings of isolation, their own, negative dysfunctional thoughts that caused them to become NEET, that contributed to them being NEET in the first place. For example, insecurities about their status, about being a failure, about, being, born ugly. Just being born ugly is also, having to look in the mirror and see their ugly face, their unwashed, unkempt face, feelings of guilt, feelings of all sorts of negative feelings, basically. And when they're forced to confront this 24/7 over time, and the inability to escape this will most likely cause the NEET in question to spiral into a negative headspace of a lot of self-deprecating, self-critical, self-judgmental, as well as, thoughts of resentment and just feeling jaded and resentful at society and the world and at people and at themselves and at everything, pretty much. And the combination of these various thoughts and negative emotions, I feel, can eventually cause a NEET to spiral into a depressive episode. So, which is where I guess I'll segue into the length of this phase. So basically, For those of you who don't know, depressive episodes can either be categorized as major or minor depressive episodes. Typically, one of the key distinguishing features between major and minor depression is the duration of the episodes. So, for example, short minor depression probably lasts anywhere from 2 weeks to maybe 2 months, versus longer major depressive episodes can last anywhere from several months, let's say like 7 months, all the way up to maybe even 2 or 3 years. And it's sometimes even permanent, although by that point, the person might have taken drastic measures by then. But that's so basically the length of this phase will last as long as the depressive episode lasts. And it's typically characterized by all of the symptoms of depression. Obviously, minor depressive episodes involve a lot less symptoms, and major depressive episodes involve, more symptoms of more severity. And I'm not going to list off all the symptoms purely because it would probably take way too much time, and because I don't really remember all of them. But just things like feelings of sadness, hopelessness, stuff like that. And I guess you could always just Google it if you want to find the full list, because I probably couldn't do a good job of listing that out, because I'm just talking off the top of my head right now. But the thing about this stage is that eventually, once the depressive episode ends, it's almost like a reset in a way, where it might be, in a way, the brain trying to reset itself in a sense, although I'm just theorizing that this might be the case. But anyways, once the stage ends, the NEET in question will probably find themselves back in the second stage, where they are able to enjoy media again. So they'll probably end up doing that out of fear of relapsing back into depression. But the thing is that once they've experienced this fourth stage just even once, they're probably more likely to relapse into this stage over and over again, with more frequency, and with each time being more and more severe, because a lot of the underlying issues that led to this depressive stage in the first place most likely weren't addressed at all. And not only that, but the hedonic adaptation which led to this phase will probably occur at a faster rate than it did before, because the brain is constantly learning, and I guess getting bored with things is a skill. So as a result, the NEET in question will probably experience depression more frequently and with greater severity each time. And that is the unfortunate nature of this stage, and will probably represent the worst of NEETdom for a lot of NEETs. Usually this stage will probably serve as a warning or a wake-up call, and might scare a NEET into taking some sort of action trying to escape NEETdom. But at the same time, it might just ultimately lead to the NEET feeling dejected and unwilling to take action to try and escape. So that's another alternative. But anyways, this is pretty much sums up the fourth stage. So the fifth and final stage is what I would refer to as the isolation, or alternatively the hikikomori stage. And as the name suggests, this stage is essentially where the NEET evolves into his quote-unquote true form, and starts to adopt a lot of hikikomori-like tendencies, which includes things like social isolation. And unlike the other stages, this stage doesn't really have anything to do with the the dopaminergic reward systems that a lot of the other stages seem to be related to, and instead has to do with the NEETs social skills and attitudes and beliefs. So as a result of this, this stage can honestly be a stage that is skipped directly to. Like what I mean by this is that a NEET might instead skip directly from the third stage to this stage, and or a NEET that is not depressed at all might still experience this stage in the long run if they continue to choose to be NEET. In fact, A NEET that doesn't experience depression might be even more likely to experience this stage simply because, well, being not depressed at all might ultimately contribute to them remaining in NEET for much longer, and hence them experiencing this stage. But basically, the root cause of this stage is the decline in the NEET's social skills, which happen over time. Because, I guess for a lot of NEETs, obviously this depends from person to person. There are social NEETs out there, but even for NEETs who socialize predominantly online, I feel like even they are subject to this stage simply because socializing online is nothing like socializing in real life. And I guess what determines whether someone is considered a hikikomori or not is how much they interact with the real world or not. And socializing online is not interacting with the real world. It's simply interacting with this sort of like weird online version of everybody. So it's clearly doesn't help things in my opinion. And anyways, this stage is caused by basically a decline in the NEET social skills. Over time, a NEET not only will avoid outside interaction because they were probably in the first place predisposed to avoiding social interaction and probably found social interactions stressful in the first place, which is what led them to become NEET. But also just simply the fact that for example, for things like immediate family, in my case, I'm pretty fortunate, but for a lot of NEETs out there, their prolonged NEETdom is very likely to cause a lot of, resentment between them and their immediate family, especially if they haven't been kicked out yet. So as a result of that, this will probably lead to less and less social contact between them and their immediate family. And also, they're just less likely to interact with the outside world at all because, that whole time they were at first binging hedonic entertainment, followed by experiencing depression and probably amotivation to do anything, which includes socializing. And over time, a lot of the areas of the brain responsible for mediating social interaction and a lot of social skills that we take for granted, like managing your facial expressions, reading other people's intentions, their body language, managing your intonation, your ability to speak and enunciate, all these sorts of skills which a lot of people, normies, take for granted, or even NEETs, will begin to erode away because everything, in the brain is quote unquote like a muscle and, will essentially atrophy over time. And as a result of this, the NEET will eventually reach a point where his social skills have been so negatively affected by their prolonged NEETdom that when they incidentally have to interact with a family member or are forced to do something like go to a grocery store or maybe go to a doctor's appointment, it quickly dawns upon them that their prolonged NEETdom has essentially destroyed their social skills. And not only that, but that they're if they were to they probably at this point feel very, very limited in the scope of their possibilities of in terms of like social interaction. And they also feel like if they were to try and interact with other people, it would probably lead to some sort of rejection. And this obviously is also rooted in a lot of unaddressed insecurities as far as like themselves goes. But also I don't think it's entirely that. I think there also is a real loss of social skills, which will very likely lead to a lot of judgment and rejection, which even just the thought of this, whether it's directly experienced or it's hypothesized by the NEET, regardless, this will incentivize the NEET to essentially isolate themselves and adopt hikikomori tendencies like staying in their room, which they're already doing in the first place, but this time for even longer periods of time, and just completely isolating themselves and shutting themselves out from the outside world. And I guess the prognosis for this stage is I guess that the likelihood of a NEET who reaches this stage reintegrating into society is very, very low, simply because the lack of social skills and the phobia, the agoraphobia, which most likely developed at this point, coupled with for example, a lot of misanthropic attitudes, beliefs, and tendencies, which most likely develop as a cope for the lack of social interaction, will probably become internalized at this point. So by this point, the NEET not only is incapable of interacting with other individuals, but probably also despises other individuals as well, or at least doesn't want anything to do with them. Despise is probably a pretty strong word, but just probably doesn't want to associate with other people. So as a result, they are further incentivized to isolate themselves. And furthermore, their pleasure or motivation systems are probably also negatively affected, to the point where they are no longer able to sustain things like a regular job. Even menial jobs would probably be unbearable, if not completely unmanageable, for most long-term NEETs who have reached this hikikomori stage, which further incentivizes them to essentially shut themselves off from the outside world and engage in escapism, and or just wallow in depression and misery, because at this point that probably seems a lot more comfortable than facing the outside world and having to deal with constant social rejection. So this probably marks the fifth and final stage of NEETdom that most NEETs experience. Obviously, there are going to be some optional stages past this stage, as well as in between the various stages that I previously mentioned. But for now, I'm probably going to keep it limited to these sort of 5 quote-unquote primary stages in this video, since this video is probably already upwards of 30 minutes, maybe even 40 minutes long by this point. So yeah, anyways, I will get on to the conclusion. All right, so in conclusion, there are 5 stages or primary stages to NEETdom. The first being the honeymoon stage, the second being the hedonic stage, the third stage being the anhedonic stage, the fourth stage being the depressive stage, and the fifth and final stage, at least for most NEETs, is the hikikomori or isolation stage. And there is another stage beyond that, but I will be talking about it in another video along with the other optional stages, simply because that stage, in my opinion, is probably very, very rare and very optional stage like the other ones. So that's why I'm not going to include it in this one. But yeah, anyways, if you guys are wondering what stage I consider myself in, it's hard for me to say because I feel like I probably am somewhere between the third and fourth stages, where I do experience minor depressive episodes sometimes, if you can even call them that. They don't even feel like depressive episodes in my opinion, because I don't get like really strong negative thoughts. It's mostly just more like an energy thing, like feeling very lethargic and bored and restless, but at the same time unable to enjoy anything. But it only lasts for maybe at most 2 to 3 weeks, and then I'm back to my usual self, where I can jump between hobbies and find at least some sort of enjoyment from what I'm doing. And some might be wondering if I'm in the quote-unquote hikikomori stage, but I don't believe this to be the case, because I have been out maybe once or twice in the past year, and although I didn't really enjoy it, I feel like my social skills have largely stayed the same. If anything, they almost improved a little bit now that I seem to have sort of given up on my life, and I feel like I have nothing to lose, which has actually in a way helped me. I'm not going to say I'm like confident, but I'm a little bit less insecure in a way because of my NEETdom. So in a way, my social skills have ironically improved, and therefore I don't consider myself a to have reached this sort of like hikikomori stage, although I have on several occasions referred to myself as a hikikomori NEET because, well, so yeah, I guess it's hard to say. Maybe I am in the hikikomori stage. You know what? I probably am in the hikikomori stage, in all honesty. So yeah, there's that. So anyways, yeah, hope you guys found this video enjoyable and not too long and rambly. I'm gonna hopefully upload another video soon talking about the additional stages. But anyways, yeah, this is Company signing out. Peace.